starting with your book, Producers, Parasites, Patriots, which you co-wrote with Daniel Martinez HoSang, you've been exploring this new and rising formation of the multiracial far right.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, this is an increasingly open, diverse far right, and yet at the same time, it's steadfastly latched onto a kind of white supremacist version of America First.
Yeah.
At the time the book was published in 2019, and I don't know the entire reception history of the book, but I imagine that it was either, the argument of the book either seemed odd or far-fetched. But then, of course, in 2020, and especially in 2024, with the elections, it's been proven correct because a rising proportion of people of color, especially men, have been voting for Trump and the Republicans. And so we were wondering what issues, what observations drew you and Dan to write the book in the first place, the kind of motivating dynamics you were observing. And then additionally, a more theoretical question about the argument in the book. Because in the book you draw from Stuart Hall and Natalia Molina to argue that race is less something that explains and more something that needs to be explained. Mm-hmm. And in order to develop that, you use the term racial transposition. Mm-hmm. And so could you additionally define this concept, which is a way of exploring the complex relationship between class and race, ultimately leading to a multiracial right-wing formation?
Okay. Let me see if I can do this in a concise way. I think, part of what I'll start with the second question first, because what led Dan and I to write that book was an observation, during the second Obama administration, that there was, on the one hand, this kind of demonization of the white poor that I talked about by Republicans and conservatives, and in almost racial terms. And on the other hand, the incorporation into the top ranks of the Republican Party of people of color, of Black and Latino, in particular, politicians. And at the time, there were people, and it wasn't just that you had kind of like a colorblind, kind of like tokenistic representation. You had people who were there who were substantial figures who not only were Black and Latino, but would narrate their neoliberal politics through Blackness or through Latino identity. So if you take someone like, Herman Cain, who ran in 2012, he's the Black entrepreneur who became rich on the Godfather's pizza chain. He would push notions of Blackness as key to his success, connected to capitalism. That it was capitalism that had liberated him. That he had grown up under humble and even humiliated conditions as a Black man in the South, Black child in the South, and it was the marketplace that freed him. It was like the market was the way out for Black people. So there began to be this language where it's not just like the growing racial liberalism that you saw with George W. Bush, but the idea that neoliberalism was necessary for Black liberation. Tim Scott is another example from that time period, and he's still around. He was a Black South Carolinian who wins a Senate seat that he ran against one of Strom Thurmond's own children, one of Strom Thurmond's white children. And he won that partly by a similar set of arguments about the importance of the marketplace and neoliberalism to Black freedom. Blackness was put front and center. So Dan and I are like, what's going on here? We have, on the one hand, a new racialization of the white poor, and on the other hand, a new language of class politics around Black liberation and brown liberation. I mean, there's more going on here. And so that was kind of the riddle that we started with. Like, what's going on with race and class? So we turn back to Stuart Hall, who reminds us that that the relationship of race to class is going to reflect historical conditions, and we are in a condition in the early 21st century of a new Gilded Age, where suddenly you have radical wealth concentration at the top, and under these conditions of real wealth disparities, which are kind of going across the board in American society, is that destabilizing the languages, particularly in a post-civil rights era in America. So we're kind of trying to put this stuff together by trying to track both the material shifts in American culture, the institutional kind of decay that's happening in concert with that, the decline of, the long decline of black civil rights, and along with the emergence of these things we're talking about. So that's kind of like where we began. But then, as you know, while we're writing this book, we started writing it during the first Obama administration. And, also Obama himself is kind of, on the one hand, a symbolic figure of liberal civil rights, but economically he is, a fiercely pro-market, figure himself, not in any way separable from the DLC politics of Bill Clinton before him. So that's kind of how we began to go into the empirics of that book. And so then it's kind of like, once you start seeing something, you begin to see it everywhere. And suddenly, then Trump runs for president while we're writing the book. One of our questions was, and partly we were looking at white poverty in Oregon as well, and state failure in Oregon. One of the questions we thought of was is it possible that white people, once finally abandoned by their party of protection, under conditions of intensified neoliberalism, is it possible they might begin to see their lot with people of color, like with people who are historic victims of this kind of abandonment? We thought, okay, is there a possibility for a new kind of politics here, where state abandonment and capitalist rapaciousness and prison industrial complex, which is like sweeping, there's more. Not only does the United States put more people in prison than any country in the world, we put more white people in prison than any country in the world. White people are also the victims of all this stuff in a way that, again, it's always they go after, using racial language, you get everybody. That's what the ruling class does in the U.S. So we thought, okay, is there some possibility here? And then Trump runs, and the answer is like, I guess not. It's like they appeal to kind of a really robust and angry, revanchist appeal to whiteness, brought people back in this way that made that an impossibility. But as we were doing that, it wasn't just that we saw this stuff happening in the Republican Party. We saw the emergence of all these far-right formations happening everywhere. And suddenly, there's all these people of color in these formations, and so it turns out that it's, the head of Patriot Prayer, which is the most violent Proud Boys associated street group in the country, is right up in Portland from where we were living. The head of Patriot Prayer is a guy named Joey Gibson, who's half Japanese, doesn't identify as white. His number two is a 300-pound Samoan street fighter named Tiny Tawasi, and none of their politics are around whiteness at all, but they're the most violent fascist street group there is in the country. So, we went up and interviewed Joey and tried to find out, sift through what's going on with his politics, and so we just kind of built out some from there, where we were seeing these shifts on the landscape. And since then, we actually have an edited volume, which is about to go to press now, on the multiracial right, which you know about, where we pull together anthropologists and historians and sociologists and political scientists to talk about where this is emerging in South Asian communities, Vietnamese communities, other Southeast Asian communities, and Native American communities, Black American communities, Black immigrant communities, various Latino communities, and we see it. And there's many different stories about why you see this emergence. Partly it's about evangelical Christianity and the Christian right. Partly it's about patriarchal politics. Partly it's about incel and misogyny politics more bluntly. Part of it's about kind of, again, this neoliberal wishes and dreams. Part of it is about older traditions of Black American conservatism. Partly And in the Vietnamese community, it's about anti-communism or Vietnamese nationalism. Partly among South Asian communities, it's Modi support, which translates into an American authoritarianism. So there's a lot of different stories going on. But part of it is that the Republican Party has opened the door to these an embrace of these groups on the one hand. The Republican Party always does this two-step move where they push white supremacy on the one hand and open the door to groups of color on the other hand, which I think there's another theoretical question in terms of other work I'm doing now more broadly on the political creativity and flexibility of the right in ways that the left does not have. Their ability to do a recombinatory politics and appropriative politics, which we see them snatch from things from the left over and over and repackage and repurpose for right-wing agendas.
So yes, so going further on that same idea, one can say that from the beginning, and you explained that earlier on in this conversation, Trump ran from the beginning on the premise that whiteness was an asset that was being depreciated, and he was there to reappreciate it. Mm-hmm. But with the emergence of a multiracial far right or right, not much difference between the two at this point, yes. It seems like also non-whites are able to purchase shares of whiteness in a way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how would be the process through which you buy shares of whiteness? I mean, you mentioned the fact that, if you glorify the market as a redemptive institution, that would be one way. But what would be the conditions under which shares of whiteness can be purchased by non-whites?
Yeah, I think it really, there are many ways, right? And so you can imagine, like under conditions of greater precarity, the desire to anchor and secure yourself in the American regime. And it may not that you really want whiteness as such, but you might want an anchor. You might want something that makes you feel like you have a stake and you're going to be protected. Becomes much more important, I think. So, there's so many different versions of it, but, right now, for instance, in this city, Eric Adams, the mayor, former cop, black mayor, who's up on multiple charges of bribery and from foreign governments and for getting rid of evidence. I mean, there's all kinds of things. He's up on all these charges, and he has gone to the Trump administration to protect him and bail him out. And the way he is doing it, by all accounts, is by opening the doors to having ICE agents and the Department of Homeland Security operate in New York City with the support of the city of New York to go after undocumented people. So part of what Adams' gambit is that he can weather this storm because he imagines that enough black New Yorkers are going to be able to be mobilized against undocumented people, right? So here you have Adams hoping to mobilize black people and black political leaders against undocumented people in a way that will make him seem like he's a protector of black people, right? It's not whiteness directly. I'll be a protector of black Americans and Americanness against these outsiders. Well, whether or not that's going to work at all is a different story. But this is one of the many ways that this story kind of works. And I think under Trumpism, it's almost as if to say, if your choice is to be somebody who is going to be humiliated and be an object of cruelty, or if you have the choice to be a humiliator and someone who doles out the cruelty, which one are you going to choose? Which would you rather? Which would you rather? And if that's the choice that people are left with, are you going to be, and that's classic fascist discourse, right? And so you can bring people into this fascist discourse by being like, we will accept you into this coalition, not as a senior partner, but as a junior partner, as long as you're willing to, work with us to demonize these people. So that's part of how it works. But also, going back to Mike Rogan, there are the counter-subversive tradition has always meant that through deeply racialized discourses and deeply racialized forms of hierarchy and domination and violence and brutality and state formation and cultural formation, you end up with something that doesn't have to be racialized on its face to still have a deep racial logic of exclusion, of domination, and of violence. And so it's so built into the American liberal model, born from settler colonialism and black slavery, that it's just how we do politics in this country. It's one version of how we do politics in this country, and being on the inside of it or the outside of it is what, it can be determined by the flexing of political power and state power and forms of violence. It's not, I wouldn't see it as whiteness as such. And I think particularly in a country that's less white all the time, you might have a replacement of whiteness with other forms of exclusion and domination through what I would just see it as, I'm starting to use the language just of authoritarian nationalism as opposed to whiteness as such, I think. And because you can see like how that, Steve Bannon yesterday, this thing that you sent me, where Bannon is saying, American Jews are treasonous if they're not in support of Israel, and non-MAGA supporting American Jews are traitors, and and so you can weirdly speak to an Israeli audience using language rife with anti-Semitism to demonize American Jews in support of Israel. So all this stuff is being re-scrambled in ways that require a lot of sorting out, and there's no easy answers, partly because identities and identifications are in motion, right? They're in motion and they're under change. The whiteness itself as a form of inclusion for, first the Irish, and then late 19th century of Eastern and Southern Europeans, and then post-war of American Jews, that model of whiteness may not adhere anymore in the same way. So it may not be inclusion into whiteness as such as the deeper logic of what whiteness always guaranteed, which was domination and submission.
So you seem to say that it's not only whiteness, it's not only race, but it's sort of a combination of race and nationality, or race and citizenship. I mean, way back, Steve Bannon was even talking about citizenship value instead of shareholder value as like the thing that needed to be appreciated. However, there might be some tension between hailing nationality and pushing a form of intelligence-based or IQ-based race. Mm-hmm. And one element of this tension, we had an example in the very beginning of the new Trump administration, in the dispute between the Doge people, so Ramaswamy, who was still part of it, and Musk on the one hand, and Bannon on the other, where Bannon was accusing Musk and Ramaswamy of being racist because they were insufficiently xenophobic, mm-hmm. since the dispute was about this visa for high-skilled migrants that the Doge people were pushing for, and that Bannon was very much pushing against. So how does this tension between race and nationality operate in the Trump administration, and how dangerous it is for the coherence of the whole thing?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, in some ways, it's mobilizations of different visions of racism in politics, and I think you have to step back and look at what each of them represents, what Musk represents politically and what Bannon represents politically. Bannon has long said that what he wants is a populist nationalism that brings in Black and Latino workers. He's sincere about that. He went around and after he left the Trump administration the first time around, he spoke at Black and Latino chambers of commerce around the country, making this appeal over and over that we need a populist movement of working class Blacks and Latinos along with working class whites to make an American nationalism. It's a certain kind of like mid-century American pluralism as populism. So, you know, that was Bannon's. Let's call that Bannon's American voice. I think he sounds different in Europe, and I think he does different things in Europe. But it's for him, it's really, he has deeply culturally nationalist impulses and instincts. Musk really represents, you know, this kind of like tech libertarianism, you know, tech capitalism, in a way that's kind of like more of an oligarchic politics. You know, the first thing he does when he gets in there is start asset stripping the federal government. You know, just in this way that's purely about markets and purely about control by certain sectors of the market and purely about moving things in his direction. That's not populist nationalism, and it's not even really fascism as much as it's, you know, it's like we're kind of stuck with a choice here between oligarchy and fascism in the Trump, you know, administration. But I think there's a wedge there to exploit. But I think, you know, so Bannon's version of racism is to attach racial difference and racial parasitism to elite South Asians and to elite non-whites who are taking jobs at the top. And that's what, you know, and that's a populist producerism. That's an idea of like hardworking Americans are being exploited by these people coming in from out of the country to take the best jobs at the best wages at the very top. So for him, there's a deep kind of like almost Jacksonian kind of populism there, which he aims at South Asians at the top. Musk is, you know, his version of racism is, you know, to find the people who are the most talented at the top and the most educated at the top and the people who can do the kind of jobs he wants to get done in a way that will make the most money there at the top. It's almost as if there's some complicated relationship between Musk's white South African heritage, both his father and his grandfather, his own childhood in apartheid South Africa and post-apartheid South Africa, and on the one hand, and this kind of like tech utopianism, neoliberal capitalism on the other hand. But I think the way that it plays out, or it played out in that fight, was really between kind of an authoritarian nationalism that Bannon represents versus kind of like raw neoliberal imperatives on the other hand.